The gunshot that echoed through the saloon in Wallace, Wyoming, on that scorching July afternoon in 1878 wasn't meant to kill anyone, but it sure got everyone's attention, especially when Ethan Irving stood on a poker table and declared himself the finest horseman west of the Mississippi River. His voice boomed through the establishment with such confidence that even the piano player stopped mid-tune, fingers hovering over yellowed keys as every head turned toward the tall cowboy with sun-bleached hair and eyes like polished silver. "I can break any stallion in 3 days flat," Ethan continued, his boots leaving dusty prints on the green felt surface. "Rope a steer faster than lightning strikes and ride harder than any man in this territory." His chest puffed out beneath his embroidered vest, the silver buttons catching lamplight. "Anyone who says different can step outside and we'll settle it proper." Nobody moved. Most folks in Wallace knew Ethan Irving could back up every word. At 24, he'd earned a reputation that stretched from Cheyenne to Laramie. He'd won every rodeo competition for 3 years running, owned the finest quarter horse anyone had seen, and could shoot a playing card edge on at 50 paces. His father had built the largest cattle operation in the region, and Ethan had inherited not just the land but the swagger that came with it. Martha Ainsworth heard about the saloon incident the next morning while scrubbing floors at the Wallace boarding house. She was on her hands and knees, her worn brown dress soaked at the hem, when the owner, Mrs. Carlyle, clucked her tongue and relayed the gossip. "That Irving boy gets more insufferable every day," Mrs. Carlyle said, sweeping dust toward Martha's bucket. "Pride comes before a fall, mark my words." Martha nodded quietly, pushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. At 22, she'd been working at the boarding house for 4 years, ever since her parents died of fever during a brutal winter. She cleaned, cooked, mended linens, and did whatever needed doing without complaint. The work was hard and the pay modest, but Mrs. Carlyle had given her a small room in the attic and 3 meals daily. Martha considered herself fortunate. "Yes, madam," Martha replied, dunking her brush in soapy water. "Though I suppose if a person has talents, it's natural they'd be proud." Mrs. Carlyle snorted. "There's a difference between honest confidence and the kind of boasting that makes decent folk uncomfortable. That young man thinks the sun rises just to hear him crow." Martha kept her thoughts to herself as she scrubbed. She'd seen Ethan Irving exactly twice in passing, always from a distance. He cut an impressive figure on horseback. She couldn't deny that. But she lived in a different world than men like him. She kept her eyes down, her expectations low, and her prayers simple. Every Sunday she thanked the Lord for her health, her work, and the roof over her head. Asking for more seemed greedy. 2 weeks later, the Wallace Summer Festival transformed the dusty Main Street into something almost magical. Colorful bunting stretched between buildings. Merchants set up stalls selling everything from ribbon candy to leather goods, and the smell of roasting meat made mouths water. The highlight would be the horse competitions, and everyone knew Ethan Irving would dominate. Martha had been given the afternoon off, a rare gift. She walked through the festival in her cleanest dress, a faded blue calico she'd carefully pressed that morning. She had 50 cents in her pocket, money she'd saved for months, and planned to buy some quality thread and maybe a small bag of peppermints. The crowd gathering near the makeshift arena was thick. Martha stood at the very edge, craning her neck to see between taller spectators. Ethan Irving sat astride a magnificent palomino, his posture perfect, his expression confident as he surveyed the competition. 5 other riders lined up, each on fine horses, but even Martha could tell none matched Ethan's presence. The race would take them around barrels set in a cloverleaf pattern, testing speed and precision. Money changed hands as bets were placed. Martha heard someone wager $50 on Ethan without hesitation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer called through a brass-speaking trumpet, "ready yourselves for the finest display of horsemanship in Wyoming territory." The starting pistol cracked. Horses exploded forward in a thunder of hooves and dust. Martha found herself holding her breath as the riders navigated the course. Ethan took an early lead, leaning low over his horse's neck, moving as one with the animal. The crowd roared. His nearest competitor, a stocky man on a bay mare, pushed hard but couldn't close the gap. Ethan crossed the finish line 3 full lengths ahead. He pulled up, wheeling his horse in a showy circle, hat held high as he acknowledged the cheers. His smile was brilliant, triumphant. Several young women near Martha sighed audibly. "He's something, isn't he?" one whispered to her friend. "Knows it too," the friend replied with a giggle. "But Lord, I wouldn't mind being the woman who catches his eye." Martha felt suddenly uncomfortable, though she couldn't articulate why. She slipped away from the crowd, heading toward the merchant's stalls. She found the dry goods vendor and carefully selected her thread, counting out coins into a weathered palm. "Thank you, Miss Ainsworth," the merchant said kindly. "You do fine work with a needle. My wife's still talking about how you mended her wedding dress." Martha smiled. "I was happy to help, Mr. Peterson." She was examining the peppermints, trying to decide if she could afford them, when a commotion erupted behind her. She turned to see Ethan Irving striding through the festival, surrounded by admirers. He was laughing, accepting congratulations, his silver belt buckle gleaming. The crowd parted before him like he was royalty. Martha stepped back instinctively, pressing against the stall. But in doing so, she bumped a display of tin cups. They clattered loudly, several falling to the ground with a terrible racket. Every head turned, including Ethan's. Heat flooded Martha's face. She immediately dropped to her knees, gathering the cups, apologizing profusely to Mr. Peterson. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. I should have been more careful. No harm done, miss," Mr. Peterson said, but Martha could feel dozens of eyes on her, and shame made her hands shake. "Let me help." The voice was deep, confident. Martha looked up to find Ethan Irving crouching beside her, picking up cups. Up close, his eyes were even more striking, flecked with blue and gray. He handed her 3 cups, his smile easy. "Happens to everyone." "Thank you," Martha whispered, unable to meet his gaze. She quickly gathered the remaining cups, set them on the stall, and hurried away before anyone could say another word. Her heart hammered against her ribs, though she couldn't explain why such a small interaction affected her so strongly. Behind her, she didn't see Ethan watch her go, a puzzled expression crossing his face. That evening, back in her attic room, Martha replayed the moment with embarrassment. She'd made a fool of herself, drawing attention when she most wanted to be invisible. Men like Ethan Irving existed in a realm so far above her own circumstances that even brief contact felt like touching something forbidden. She prepared for bed, braiding her long, dark hair, washing her face in the basin. Through her small window, she could see stars emerging in the deepening sky. Tomorrow she'd be back to work before dawn, and the festival would be a memory. Life would return to its familiar rhythm, and that was exactly how she preferred it. But in his family's grand ranch house, 5 miles outside Wallace, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the woman at the festival. Something about her had struck him as different. The way she'd apologized so profusely for such a minor accident, the way she'd fled rather than bask in his attention like most women did. He didn't even know her name. "You're quiet tonight," his father observed over dinner. Thomas Irving was a broad man in his 50s, weathered by decades of ranch work but still formidable. "Usually after a win, you talk our ears off," Ethan grinned. Just tired, I suppose. It was a good day, though. Every day's good when you're young and talented, his father said, not unkindly. You've earned the right to be proud, son. You work hard, you win fair. Nothing wrong with knowing your worth. Ethan nodded, cutting into his steak. His father had always encouraged confidence. Second-guessing yourself was for weak men, Thomas always said. A man should stand tall, speak his mind, and never apologize for being capable. That philosophy had served the Irving family well. But as Ethan retired to his room that night, surrounded by trophy belt buckles and ribbons from various competitions, he found himself wondering what it might be like to talk to someone who wasn't impressed by any of it. Someone who'd hurry away rather than seek his attention. The thought was oddly refreshing. Monday morning brought Martha back to her routine. She stripped beds, carried water, scrubbed floors, and helped prepare meals. Mrs. Carlyle ran the boarding house with efficiency and high standards. 6 rooms upstairs housed traveling salesmen, ranch hands between jobs, and occasionally families passing through. The work was endless. "Martha, we're expecting a new boarder this afternoon," Mrs. Carlyle announced at noon. "A gentleman from Laramie, here on business for a month. I want the corner room spotless, fresh linens and flowers on the dresser if you can manage it." "Yes, madam," Martha said. The corner room was the nicest, with 2 windows and more space. She spent hours making it perfect, beating the rug outside until no dust emerged, washing the windows until they gleamed, arranging wildflowers she'd picked behind the building in a small vase. The boarder arrived at 4 o'clock. Martha heard his voice drifting up from the parlor as Mrs. Carlyle gave him the tour. She stayed out of sight, as was proper. Guests didn't need the hired help underfoot. That evening, after serving dinner to the boarders and cleaning the kitchen, Martha finally climbed to her attic room. Her back ached, her hands were red from harsh soap, but the work was done. She lit her small oil lamp and pulled out the letter she'd been writing to her cousin in Denver. The correspondence was Martha's one luxury, a connection to family. A knock on her door startled her. Mrs. Carlyle rarely climbed to the attic. "Yes," Martha called. "It's just me, dear," Mrs. Carlyle said through the door. "May I come in?" Martha opened the door. Mrs. Carlyle looked tired, her gray hair escaping its bun. "I need to ask a favor," the older woman said. "My sister in Cheyenne has taken ill. I need to go to her for a few days, maybe a week. Would you be able to manage the boarding house? I'll leave money for supplies, and the girls from town can come help with the heavy cleaning." Martha's eyes widened. "You want me to run the house?" "I trust you more than anyone," Mrs. Carlyle said firmly. "You know the routine better than I do sometimes. You're capable and honest. Say you'll do it." Pride wasn't something Martha often felt, but warmth spread through her chest now. "Of course. I hope your sister recovers quickly." Mrs. Carlyle left on the Wednesday stage. Martha found herself in charge of 6 boarders, 3 meals daily, and all the household management. She woke even earlier than usual, determined to prove Mrs. Carlyle's faith wasn't misplaced. Friday afternoon, she was in the kitchen preparing supper when someone knocked on the back door. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened it to find a young man holding a telegram. "Delivery for Mrs. Carlyle," he said. "She's away. I'm managing in her absence." The boy handed over the telegram. "It's from the Irving ranch. They're asking about rooms." Martha's stomach fluttered strangely. She opened the telegram and read it quickly. The Irving family was hosting business associates from Omaha next week. Could the boarding house accommodate 3 gentlemen for 5 nights? They'd pay premium rates. Martha's mind raced. 3 guests for 5 nights would mean significant income for Mrs. Carlyle. The money would be welcome. But hosting important business associates meant everything had to be absolutely perfect. "Tell them we can accommodate them," Martha said, hoping her voice sounded more confident than she felt. "Starting Monday." The boy nodded and ran off. Martha closed the door and leaned against it. She had 3 days to prepare. 3 days to make sure every detail was flawless. She threw herself into work with renewed energy. She recruited 2 girls from town to help with deep cleaning. Together they scrubbed every surface, washed all the curtains, polished every piece of silver. Martha planned menus featuring the best dishes she knew how to prepare. She bought fresh vegetables from the market, ordered quality beef from the butcher, and baked bread until the kitchen smelled like heaven. Monday morning, she arranged flowers in each of the 3 rooms the guests would occupy. Her dress was her newest, a simple gray wool she'd made herself. She braided her hair into a neat crown, pinched her cheeks for color, and told herself this was just like any other day. The guests arrived at 2 o'clock. Martha opened the door to find 3 well-dressed men in suits, and behind them, Ethan Irving himself, looking impossibly tall and handsome in a black coat. "Good afternoon," Martha said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Welcome to Wallace Boarding House. Please come in." The 3 businessmen entered, removing their hats. Ethan followed, and Martha felt his eyes on her. Recognition flickered across his face. "You're the woman from the festival," he said. "With the tin cups." Heat crept up Martha's neck. "Yes, sir, please let me show you to the parlor. I've prepared refreshments." She led them inside, acutely aware of Ethan's presence behind her. In the parlor, she'd set out lemonade, cookies, and small sandwiches. The businessmen settled into chairs, complimenting the room's tidiness. "Miss Ainsworth has been managing the boarding house this week," one of the guests said, having apparently heard from Mrs. Carlyle before. "We're in excellent hands, gentlemen." "Ainsworth," Ethan repeated quietly. "Martha Ainsworth." She met his eyes briefly. "Yes, sir." "If you'll excuse me, I'll show you to your rooms." She gave them the tour, explaining meal times, house rules, and amenities. The businessmen seemed pleased. Ethan remained quiet, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. When she finished, the businessmen retreated to their rooms to rest from their journey. Ethan lingered in the hallway. "Thank you for accommodating us," he said. "I know it was short notice." "We're glad to have you," Martha replied, clutching her hands together. Being alone with him in the narrow hallway made her nervous. "Dinner will be at 6 o'clock. Miss Ainsworth, may I ask you something?" She waited, not trusting her voice. "You remember me, from the festival, I mean, beyond the cup incident." "I saw you race," Martha said carefully. "You won." "Congratulations." "Thank you," he smiled, and it was different from the triumphant grin she'd seen at the festival, softer somehow. "I hope we won't be too much trouble this week." "No trouble at all, Mr. Irving." She escaped to the kitchen before he could say more, her heart pounding inexplicably. She had dinner to prepare. There was no time to worry about why Ethan Irving's attention unsettled her so much. Dinner that evening tested every skill Martha possessed. She served roasted chicken with herb gravy, mashed potatoes, fresh beans, biscuits, and apple pie for dessert. The businessmen praised every dish enthusiastically. Ethan ate quietly, but she noticed he took second helpings of everything. "Miss Ainsworth, this is the finest meal I've had in months," one of the businessmen declared. "You're a remarkable cook." "Thank you, sir," Martha said, refilling water glasses. "I'm glad you're enjoying it." "Ethan, you should hire her away from this boarding house," another guest joked. "Your ranch hands would never complain about meals again." Ethan's eyes found Martha's. "I suspect Miss Ainsworth is quite content where she is. Not everyone can be bought with offers of money." Something in his tone suggested it wasn't meant as an insult, but Martha felt defensive anyway. "I'm grateful for my position here. Mrs. Carlyle has been very kind to me." After dinner, Martha cleaned the kitchen until everything gleamed. She prepared dough for tomorrow's bread, checked that enough wood was stacked for the stove, and finally climbed to her attic room near midnight. Her whole body ached, but the first day had gone well. 4 more days, and she'd have fulfilled her promise to Mrs. Carlyle. She didn't know that in his room below, Ethan lay awake thinking about the quiet woman who worked herself to exhaustion without complaint. He'd grown up with servants, people who performed tasks efficiently but without the obvious care Martha brought to her work. She'd arranged flowers in his room. Real wildflowers, not expensive hothouse roses, but chosen and placed with attention. His towels were folded precisely, his bed made with hospital corners. Small details that spoke of someone who took pride in doing things right. It occurred to him that he'd never met someone so opposite to himself. He announced his accomplishments loudly. She hid hers behind service to others. He demanded recognition. She seemed to shrink from it. He'd always been taught that confidence was strength, but watching Martha navigate the boarding house with quiet competence, he wondered if perhaps there were different kinds of strength. Tuesday brought rain, a steady drumming that turned Wallace's streets to mud. The businessmen worked at the dining table, papers spread everywhere, discussing cattle prices and railroad routes. Martha kept coffee fresh and brought lunch promptly at noon. In the afternoon, she needed supplies from the general store. She threw a shawl over her shoulders and braved the weather, walking quickly with her head down. The store was warm and crowded. She gathered flour, sugar, coffee beans, and lamp oil, checking Mrs. Carlyle's household budget carefully. "Miss Ainsworth." She turned to find Ethan Irving shaking rain from his coat near the door. He'd apparently been out riding despite the weather. "Mr. Irving," she said, "is something wrong at the boarding house?" "No, everything's fine. I just needed to pick up tobacco for one of our guests." He moved closer, and Martha became aware that other customers were watching them. "Let me help you with those supplies. That's too much for you to carry in this rain." "I can manage, thank you." "I don't doubt you can manage," Ethan said. "But there's no reason you should struggle when I have a wagon right outside." Martha wanted to refuse. Accepting help from Ethan Irving felt dangerous somehow, like stepping off solid ground. But rain pounded against the store's windows, and she did have more supplies than she could easily carry. "That's very kind," she said finally. "Thank you." He loaded her purchases into his wagon, then helped her up to the bench seat. His hand was warm and calloused, strong from years of ranch work. Martha sat stiffly as he climbed up beside her and urged the horses forward. "You've been working yourself hard," Ethan observed as they navigated the muddy street. "I've watched you. You're up before dawn and working past dark. Mrs. Carlyle entrusted me with her establishment. I won't disappoint her." "I don't think you could disappoint anyone if you tried." He glanced at her. "Do you ever rest?" "Rest is a luxury for people with leisure time." "That sounds like something you tell yourself to justify never stopping." Martha stiffened. "You don't know me, Mr. Irving." "No," he admitted. "I don't, but I'd like to." The words hung between them. Martha's hands tightened in her lap. "Why?" "Because you're different from anyone I've ever met." "I'm a housekeeper," Martha said quietly. "There's nothing special about me." "I disagree." Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the boarding house. Rain continued to fall, creating a curtain of gray around them. "You work with purpose. You pay attention to details. You don't seek praise or recognition. That's rare." Martha didn't know what to say. Men like Ethan didn't notice women like her, not really. This had to be some kind of passing curiosity, an amusement to break up a boring business trip. "Thank you for the ride," she said, reaching for the supplies. Ethan caught her arm gently. "Martha, I meant what I said. I'd like to know you better. Would you take a walk with me tomorrow after dinner?" If the rain stops, every sensible part of Martha's mind screamed that this was a mistake. They came from different worlds. He was proud, confident, celebrated. She was nobody, nothing special, just a woman who scrubbed floors and cooked meals. What could they possibly have to say to each other? But something in his eyes made her hesitate. He looked at her like she mattered, like her answer mattered. No one had looked at her that way in years. "I finished the dishes around 8, she heard herself say. "If you still want to walk then, I suppose I could spare 20 minutes. His smile transformed his face. "Thank you. I'll meet you at the back door." He carried her supplies inside, setting them in the kitchen. Then he was gone, back to join the businessmen in the parlor. Martha stood among bags of flour and coffee, wondering what she'd just agreed to. The rest of Tuesday passed in a blur. Martha moved through her tasks mechanically, her mind elsewhere. She told herself 100 times to back out, to send a message that she'd reconsidered. But 8 o'clock came, and she found herself removing her apron, smoothing her dress, checking her reflection in a polished pot. Ethan waited by the back door as promised. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and cool. Puddles reflected the emerging stars. "The evening's beautiful," he said. "Shall we?" They walked toward the edge of town where buildings gave way to open prairie. Neither spoke at first. Martha felt awkward, unsure how to conduct herself. She'd never walked alone with a man, never been courted if that's what this was. "Tell me about yourself," Ethan finally said. "Where did you grow up?" "Here in Wallace. My father was a clerk at the land office. My mother took in sewing." The words came easier than she expected. "They were good people, honest. They taught me the value of hard work. You must miss them." "Every day." Martha surprised herself by continuing. "When they died, I thought I'd have to leave town, find work somewhere else. But Mrs. Carlyle offered me a position. She didn't have to. I was 18 and inexperienced. She showed me kindness when I needed it most." Ethan listened without interrupting, his attention focused entirely on her. It was unnerving and oddly wonderful. "What about you?" Martha asked, feeling she should reciprocate. "What's it like running a big ranch, truthfully?" "I don't run it. My father does. I help certainly, but it's his operation." Ethan kicked at a small stone. "Everyone assumes I'll take over someday, and I suppose I will. But sometimes I wonder if I'm following that path because I want to or because it's expected." Martha glanced at him in surprise. She'd never imagined Ethan Irving might question his life. "You're good with horses. I saw you at the festival." "Being good at something isn't the same as loving it," he said. "Though I do love horses. I love the ranch. I just sometimes feel like I'm performing a role everyone's written for me." "Does that make sense?" "Yes," Martha said softly. "It makes sense." They walked further, their conversation flowing more naturally now. Ethan asked about her childhood, her interests, her dreams. Martha found herself sharing things she rarely discussed. How she loved reading but couldn't afford books. How she secretly wrote poetry in a journal hidden under her mattress. How she sometimes climbed to the boarding house roof to watch sunsets. "Poetry," Ethan said, clearly delighted. "Would you share a poem?" "Absolutely not," Martha said, mortified. "They're terrible." "I doubt that. They're private." She felt her face flush. "I've never shown them to anyone." "Then I'm honored you told me they exist." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Martha, I know this might sound strange, but talking to you tonight has been the most honest conversation I've had in months. Maybe years. People usually just tell me what they think I want to hear." "Maybe because you surround yourself with people who want something from you," Martha said, then immediately regretted her boldness. "I apologize. That was inappropriate." "No, it was true," Ethan smiled. "See, that's what I mean. You don't flatter me. You're honest." They walked back slowly. At the boarding house's back door, Ethan thanked her for her time. "Would you walk with me again tomorrow?" he asked. Martha knew she should say no. This couldn't lead anywhere good. But standing in the moonlight with this man who listened when she spoke, who saw her as more than just a pair of hands to work, she found herself nodding. "Tomorrow," she agreed. That night, Martha lay in her narrow bed staring at the ceiling. She didn't understand what was happening. Men like Ethan Irving didn't court women like her. This had to be temporary, a diversion. Soon he'd return to his ranch and his life, and she'd return to being invisible. But the memory of his attention, his genuine interest in her thoughts, warmed something in her chest that had been cold for years. Wednesday and Thursday followed similar patterns. The businessmen worked during the day while Martha maintained the boarding house. Evenings brought walks with Ethan, their conversations growing deeper and more personal. He told her about pressure from his father to marry well, to choose a woman from an established ranching family. She told him about loneliness, about feeling invisible in a town where everyone knew everyone but few truly saw her. "You're not invisible to me," Ethan said Thursday evening as they sat on a bench overlooking a creek. "You're the most real person I've met. You barely know me. I know you work without complaint. I know you're kind to everyone. I know you have a beautiful mind and a generous heart." He shifted closer. "I know that talking to you makes me want to be better than I am." Martha's breath caught. "Ethan, you need to understand something. I'm not from your world. I have nothing to offer someone like you." "Someone like me," he repeated. "What does that mean? Successful, accomplished, proud?" She forced herself to continue. "You stride through life expecting the best and you receive it. I move through life grateful for small mercies. We're opposites." "Maybe that's exactly right," Ethan said quietly. "Maybe I need someone who sees the world differently than I do. Maybe you need someone who can show you that you deserve more than you allow yourself." He reached for her hand. Martha let him take it, his fingers intertwining with hers. The gesture felt monumental, forbidden, thrilling. "I frighten you," Ethan observed. "Why?" "Because this can't be real," Martha whispered. "Because men like you don't fall for women like me. Because I'll wake up and this will have been a dream." "It's not a dream." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I'm falling for you, Martha Ainsworth. I know it's fast. I know it seems impossible, but it's happening." Martha wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly it physically hurt. But years of being overlooked, of understanding her place in the world's hierarchy, made faith difficult. "Your father would never approve," she said. "Your friends would laugh. Let them." Ethan's voice was fierce. "I've spent my whole life performing for audiences, seeking approval, building a reputation. And I'm tired, Martha. I'm tired of wondering if people see me or just the image I've created. You see me, the real me. That's worth more than any reputation." Tears pricked Martha's eyes. "I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I," Ethan admitted. "But I want to try, don't you?" She did. Heaven help her, she did. Friday arrived too quickly. The businessmen would leave Saturday morning, and Ethan with them. The prospect of his departure filled Martha with unexpected dread. In 5 short days, he'd become essential to her happiness. How had she let that happen? Friday dinner was especially elaborate. Martha had poured everything into the meal, roasting duck with cherry sauce, preparing vegetables glazed with butter and herbs, baking a 3-layer cake. The businessmen praised every bite, but Ethan said little, pushing food around his plate. After dinner, after the dishes were cleaned and the kitchen restored to order, Martha found him waiting by the back door as had become their custom. "I need to talk to you," he said without preamble. They walked to their bench by the creek. The night was clear, stars brilliant overhead. Martha wrapped her shawl tighter, though she wasn't truly cold. I don't want to leave tomorrow, Ethan said. I don't want to go back to my life and pretend this week didn't happen. What are you saying? He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands. I'm saying I want to court you properly. I want permission to visit you, to write to you, to build something real between us. Ethan, be sensible. Your father will have to accept my choice. Martha, I'm 24 years old. I've done everything expected of me. I've won competitions, worked the ranch, been the son he wanted. But I've never been truly happy. Not until this week, not until you, Martha's heart hammered. People will talk, they'll say terrible things. Let them talk, I don't care. He squeezed her hands. Do you care for me? Even a little, more than a little, Martha admitted, tears spilling over. But caring isn't enough. The world doesn't work that way. Then we'll change how the world works. Ethan wiped her tears with his thumbs, his touch unbearably gentle. At least for us. Martha, I'm not asking you to marry me tonight. I'm asking for a chance. For time to prove this is real. Will you give me that? Everything sensible told Martha to refuse. This would end in heartbreak. His family would reject her. Society would scorn them. She'd lose her position, her reputation, everything she'd carefully built. But looking into Ethan's eyes, seeing his hope, his vulnerability, his genuine affection, Martha couldn't say no. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll give you a chance. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Martha felt the earth shift beneath her feet. She'd never been kissed before. She'd never imagined it could feel like this, like coming home and embarking on an adventure simultaneously. When they finally parted, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. Thank you for taking a risk on the proudest cowboy in Wyoming. Martha laughed through her tears. Thank you for seeing the humblest woman in Wallace. You're not humble, Ethan corrected. You're grounded. You're real. You're everything I need to balance the parts of me that have gotten too big for their own good. They sat by the creek until late, making plans. Ethan would return to the ranch but visit Wallace every week. He'd write letters between visits. He'd court her openly, regardless of gossip. Martha felt dizzy with possibility and terror in equal measure. Saturday morning came too soon. The businessmen loaded their luggage, settled accounts, and thanked Martha profusely for her hospitality. Ethan lingered until last. I'll see you Wednesday, he promised, standing in the boarding house doorway. I'll come for dinner. I'll be here, Martha said. Martha, one more thing. Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are. Not my father, not town gossips, not anyone. You're extraordinary. Promise me you'll remember that. I promise, she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it yet. He left. The boarding house felt suddenly empty and quiet. Martha threw herself into work, stripping beds, washing linens, preparing for Mrs. Carlyle's return. But her mind kept drifting to silver-gray eyes and gentle hands, and the impossible hope blooming in her chest. Mrs. Carlyle returned Sunday evening, exhausted but relieved. Her sister was recovering. The boarding house, she reported after inspection, looked absolutely perfect. You've done wonderfully, Martha, she said warmly. I knew I could trust you. The Irving group was pleased, Martha offered. They paid generously. Yes, Mr. Irving left an extra amount with a note saying it was specifically for you. Mrs. Carlyle handed Martha an envelope. He wrote that your service exceeded all expectations. Inside was more money than Martha made in 3 months, along with a brief note in elegant handwriting. Thank you for a week I'll never forget. Until Wednesday. Ethan. Martha pressed the note to her chest, happiness and fear warring inside her. This was really happening. Ethan Irving was courting her. The knowledge was terrifying and wonderful and completely overwhelming. Monday brought routine back. Martha scrubbed, cooked, cleaned, and tried not to count hours until Wednesday. Tuesday felt eternal. She caught herself staring out windows, jumping at every sound, smoothing her dress unnecessarily. "You're distracted," Mrs. Carlyle observed Tuesday afternoon. "Is something wrong?" "No, madam." "I'm sorry, I'll focus better." Mrs. Carlyle studied her with sharp eyes. "Martha, you know you can talk to me if something's troubling you." Martha hesitated. Mrs. Carlyle had been kind, but discussing Ethan Irving felt dangerous. What if her employer disapproved? What if she forbade the courtship? "I'm just tired," Martha said finally. "Nothing to worry about." But Wednesday afternoon, when Ethan Irving walked through the boarding house's front door, his hat in his hands and hope in his eyes, there was no hiding anything. Mrs. Carlyle happened to be in the parlor when he arrived. "Mr. Irving," she said, surprised, "we weren't expecting guests from your party." "I'm not here on business, madam." Ethan's voice was respectful but firm. "I'm here to see Miss Ainsworth if she's available and willing." Mrs. Carlyle's eyebrows rose. She looked at Martha, who'd frozen in the doorway, then back at Ethan. "I see. Martha, do you wish to receive this caller?" Every eye in the boarding house seemed focused on Martha. Two guests reading newspapers had looked up. The room felt airless. "Yes, madam," Martha said quietly, "if that's permitted." Mrs. Carlyle was silent for a long moment. Then, to Martha's shock, she smiled slightly. "The front porch is a respectable place for a visit. I'll bring lemonade in 10 minutes. That should be adequate chaperone time." Relief flooded through Martha. "Thank you, Mrs. Carlyle." On the porch, Ethan took her hands immediately. "I missed you. Is that foolish? It's only been 4 days, but I missed you." "I missed you too," Martha admitted. They sat on the porch swing, talking rapidly, trying to fit days of thoughts into limited time. Ethan told her about his father's reaction when he mentioned courting someone in town. "He assumed you were from one of the ranching families," Ethan said. "The Carters or the Hendersons." "When I corrected him, when I told him you worked at the boarding house, he was silent for a full minute. He disapproves. He doesn't understand, not yet, but he will." Ethan's jaw set stubbornly. "He'll see what I see. He'll recognize your worth." Martha wasn't as confident, but she didn't argue. Mrs. Carlyle brought lemonade as promised, her expression carefully neutral. Other boarders found reasons to pass through the parlor, sneaking glances at the couple on the porch. By evening, Martha knew, all of Wallace would know Ethan Irving was courting the boarding house housekeeper. True to her prediction, the gossip spread like wildfire. Thursday morning, when Martha went to the market, conversation stopped as she approached. Women whispered behind their hands. Men looked at her with new speculation. Mrs. Carlyle's friends came calling with thinly veiled questions. "Is it true Ethan Irving has taken an interest in your Martha?" one asked over tea. "Mr. Irving has been a gentleman caller, yes," Mrs. Carlyle replied crisply. "And I'll thank you not to phrase it as if my Martha is somehow unworthy of such attention. She's a fine young woman." Martha, overhearing from the kitchen, felt tears of gratitude. Mrs. Carlyle was defending her when she had no obligation to do so, but not everyone was kind. Friday afternoon, while Martha swept the front porch, 3 young women from prominent families passed by. Martha recognized them from church. "I can't imagine what Ethan Irving sees in her," one said, just loud enough to be heard. "She's nothing special." "Maybe he's amusing himself," another suggested. "Rich men do that sometimes, court beneath their station for novelty. His father must be mortified." Martha's hands tightened on the broom handle. She kept sweeping, kept her head down, but the words burned. Was that what people thought? That she was a temporary amusement? That Ethan couldn't possibly be sincere? That evening, Ethan arrived for his second visit of the week. The moment he saw Martha's face, his expression darkened. "What happened?" "Nothing, just gossip." "Tell me." Martha repeated what she'd overheard. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. "They have no right, they have every right to their opinions," Martha interrupted. "Ethan, this is what I tried to tell you. People see us as mismatched. You're celebrated and I'm nobody. That's just reality." "You're not nobody," Ethan said fiercely. "And I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." The next Sunday, Wallace's small church was packed as usual. Martha sat in her customary place in the back row, trying to be unnoticed. The service was halfway through when the doors opened and Ethan Irving walked in, his father beside him. Everyone turned. The Irving family never attended this church. They usually went to the larger congregation in the next town. But here they were, and Ethan was walking purposefully down the aisle. He stopped at Martha's pew, his eyes meeting hers. "May I sit with you?" her heart hammered. Every person in the church was watching. This was a public declaration, an unmistakable statement. If she said yes, there would be no hiding, no pretending this was casual. "Yes," Martha whispered. Ethan sat beside her. His father, looking uncomfortable, took the space next to Ethan. The service continued, but Martha heard nothing. She was intensely aware of Ethan's presence, his shoulder nearly touching hers, his solid reality beside her. After the service, Ethan took her arm as they exited. Outside, in front of the entire congregation, he introduced Martha to his father. "Father, this is Miss Martha Ainsworth. Martha, my father, Thomas Irving." Thomas Irving was a large man with weather-beaten features and shrewd eyes. He studied Martha carefully, his expression unreadable. "Miss Ainsworth," he said finally, "my son speaks highly of you." "Thank you, sir," Martha managed. "It's an honor to meet you. Ethan tells me you manage the Wallace boarding house." "I work there, yes, sir. Mrs. Carlyle is the owner." "Honest work," Thomas said. "Nothing wrong with honest work." It wasn't quite approval, but it wasn't rejection either. Martha felt a tiny seed of hope. Over the following weeks, Ethan became a constant presence in Martha's life. He visited 3 times weekly, always proper, always respectful, but unmistakably courting her. He brought her small gifts, a book of poetry, ribbons for her hair, a shawl in deep blue. He talked about his life, his dreams, his fears. He listened to her with complete attention, asking questions that showed he truly heard her answers. Slowly, painfully slowly, Wallace adjusted to the unlikely courtship. Some people remained skeptical, but others began to soften. Mrs. Carlyle openly championed Martha, praising her work and character to anyone who would listen. The minister's wife, a kind woman named Eleanor, invited Martha to a ladies' tea and welcomed her warmly. "Love finds its own path," Eleanor told Martha privately. "Anyone can see that young man is devoted to you. That's all that matters." 6 weeks into their courtship, Ethan invited Martha to visit the ranch. He sent his carriage to collect her on a Saturday afternoon. Martha wore her best dress, her stomach churning with anxiety. Meeting Thomas Irving in church was different from visiting his home, his territory. The Irving Ranch was magnificent, sprawling acres of prime grazing land, a large main house, multiple outbuildings, corrals full of horses. Workers moved with purpose across the property. This was Ethan's world, and the contrast to Martha's small attic room couldn't have been starker. Ethan met the carriage personally, helping Martha down, his smile warm. "I'm so glad you came. Let me show you around." He walked her through the property, pointing out his favorite horses, introducing her to ranch hands who tipped their hats politely. In the main paddock, a beautiful black stallion pranced and tossed his head. "That's Midnight," Ethan said. "I've been working with him for months. He's stubborn, but he's learning to trust me." "Like his owner," Martha said without thinking, then blushed. "I'm sorry, that was presumptuous." Ethan laughed. "No, you're right, we're both learning to trust." He climbed the fence, beckoning her to follow. "Come meet him." Martha hesitated. I don't know anything about horses. That's fine, neither did I once. He held out his hand. I've got you. She climbed the fence, Ethan steadying her. Up close, Midnight was even more impressive, all muscle and power. But when Ethan spoke to him, low and gentle, the horse calmed. Hold out your hand, palm flat, Ethan instructed. Martha did. Midnight sniffed her hand, his breath warm. His eyes were intelligent, curious. When Ethan nodded encouragingly, Martha carefully touched the horse's neck. His coat was silk over steel. He likes you, Ethan said. That's a good sign. Midnight doesn't take to everyone. They spent an hour with the horses, Ethan teaching Martha basic care, letting her help groom Midnight. There was something peaceful about the work, rhythmic and meditative. Martha found herself relaxing. Dinner was in the main house's formal dining room. Thomas Irving was cordial but reserved. He asked Martha about her family, her work, her education. She answered honestly, refusing to pretend to be more than she was. My parents were simple people, she said. They taught me to read, to work hard, to be honest. I didn't attend finishing school or learn piano, but I can manage a household. I'm good with numbers and I keep my commitments. Practical skills, Thomas observed, valuable in their own right. After dinner, Ethan walked Martha through the house's gardens. Sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Thank you for being yourself, Ethan said. I know my father can be intimidating. He's protective of you, that's natural. Martha touched a rose bloom, soft petals against her fingers. Ethan, have you really thought about what this means? If we continue, if this becomes serious, your life will change. People will judge you. Let them judge. He caught her hand, pulling her to face him. Martha, I've had 2 months to think. 2 months of courting you, learning you, falling deeper every day. I don't care what people think. I care about you, about us. Your pride wasn't real pride, Ethan interrupted. It was armor, a way to convince myself and everyone else that I was fine, that I didn't need anything or anyone. But you've shown me something different. You've shown me that real strength is quiet. That real confidence doesn't need to shout. You've made me better. Martha's eyes filled with tears. You've made me see myself differently too. I always thought I was invisible, insignificant, but you look at me like I matter, like I'm valuable just as I am. You are valuable, exactly as you are. Ethan cupped her face in his hands. Martha Ainsworth, I'm in love with you, completely, terrifyingly in love. I know it's fast, I know we're different, but I can't imagine my life without you in it. I love you too, Martha whispered. I tried not to. I told myself it was impossible, but I do. I love you so much. He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Martha felt the last of her defenses crumble. This was real. This was happening. Against all odds, the proudest cowboy in Wyoming and the humblest woman in Wallace had found each other, and somehow, impossibly, they fit. When Ethan finally pulled back, his eyes were bright. Will you marry me, Martha? Not someday, not eventually. Soon. As soon as you'll have me. I want you as my wife, my partner. I want to build a life with you. Martha should have been shocked. They'd only been courting 2 months. But standing in his arms, surrounded by fading light and the scent of roses, the answer was easy. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. The engagement was announced the following Sunday in church. The news rippled through Wallace like a stone dropped in still water. Some people were genuinely happy. Mrs. Carlyle cried with joy, hugging Martha tightly. The minister's wife organized an engagement tea. Several townswomen who'd been cold before offered cautious congratulations, but others remained skeptical or openly hostile. Martha overheard more than one conversation speculating that she'd trapped Ethan somehow, that the marriage wouldn't last, that she was a gold digger. Ethan heard the gossip too, and it infuriated him. But Martha counseled patience. We can't change everyone's minds, she said. We can only prove them wrong through time and action. You're wise, Ethan said, pulling her close. How did I get so lucky? I ask myself the same thing every day. They planned a simple wedding for October, just 6 weeks away. Martha insisted on modest arrangements despite Ethan's desire to give her everything. She chose a simple white dress she made herself, wildflowers instead of expensive imported blooms, a small reception at the church hall. I don't need grand gestures, she told Ethan. I just need you. Thomas Irving remained reserved about the engagement, but he began warming to Martha. She visited the ranch regularly, and he watched how she interacted with the staff, with the animals, with his son. One evening, he asked to speak with her privately. Miss Ainsworth, I'll be honest. When Ethan first told me about you, I had concerns. Thomas's voice was gruff but not unkind. You're not what I envisioned for him. You don't come from ranching people. You don't have a dowry or connections. Martha kept her spine straight. No, sir, I don't. But I've watched you these past months. You don't put on airs. You're not trying to change Ethan or mold him into something he's not. You listen to him. You challenge him when he needs it, support him when he's uncertain. That's worth more than any dowry. Tears pricked Martha's eyes. Thank you, sir. That means everything. My son was getting too big for his britches, Thomas continued. All swagger and no substance sometimes. You've grounded him, made him think about things beyond competitions and reputation. You balance him. That's what a good marriage should do. He balances me too, Martha said softly. He's shown me I can dream bigger than I allowed myself, that I'm worth more than I believed. Thomas nodded. Then you'll be good for each other. You have my blessing, Martha, truly. When Martha told Ethan about the conversation later, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing. I told you he'd come around. You were right, Martha admitted, about so many things. The weeks before the wedding flew past. Martha gave notice to Mrs. Carlyle, who was sad to lose her but thrilled for her happiness. The townswomen who'd softened toward Martha helped her prepare, offering advice on running a large household, on managing ranch staff, on being a wife. Eleanor, the minister's wife, pulled Martha aside one afternoon. You're nervous about the wedding night, she observed kindly. Martha blushed furiously. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who remembers being in your place. Listen to me, dear. Ethan loves you. He's patient and kind. Trust that, trust him, and trust yourself. The reassurance helped. Martha tried to quiet her anxieties and focus on excitement instead. She was marrying the man she loved. Everything else would work itself out. October arrived with crisp air and brilliant foliage. The morning of Martha's wedding dawned clear and beautiful. In her small attic room one last time, Martha dressed carefully. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant, white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. She'd embroidered tiny flowers along the hem, each stitch a meditation on the life she was beginning. Mrs. Carlyle helped arrange Martha's hair, weaving wildflowers into the dark braids. You look beautiful, the older woman said, tears in her eyes. Your parents would be so proud. I wish they could be here, Martha whispered. They are in spirit. And they're rejoicing that you've found such happiness. At the church, Martha stood in the vestibule, her hand trembling on Thomas Irving's arm. He'd offered to walk her down the aisle, a gesture that had moved her deeply. Ready? He asked gently. Yes, Martha said. I'm ready. The doors opened. The church was packed, every pew full. But Martha saw only Ethan standing at the altar in his finest suit, his face transformed with joy. As she walked toward him, she felt no fear, only certainty. This was right. They were right. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They spoke traditional vows, their voices steady and sure. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed her tenderly, and applause filled the church. At the reception, people toasted the newlyweds. Thomas Irving gave a short speech about how his son had found a woman who made him better, who would stand beside him through whatever came. Mrs. Carlyle spoke about watching Martha grow from a frightened girl into a confident woman. Even some who'd initially disapproved seemed caught up in the joy of the day. But the moment Martha treasured most came late in the reception. She and Ethan stole a few minutes alone in the church garden, the sounds of celebration distant. "We did it," Ethan said, holding both her hands. "You're my wife, Mrs. Ethan Irving." "Mrs. Martha Irving," she corrected with a smile. "I'm still me, just with a new name." "You'll always be you," Ethan agreed. "That's what I'm counting on. Martha, I promise you this. I'll spend every day trying to deserve you. I'll work to keep balance between us. I'll never let pride or arrogance drive us apart. And I promise not to hide or diminish myself," Martha said. "You've taught me I'm allowed to take up space in the world. I won't forget that." They kissed again, sealing promises deeper than vows. When they finally rejoined the party, they moved as one, hands intertwined, ready to face their future together. Martha moved to the ranch immediately after the wedding. The transition from her small attic room to the spacious ranch house was jarring. She had entire rooms to herself now, a wardrobe full of new dresses Ethan had insisted on buying, household staff who looked to her for direction. Those first weeks tested Martha. She was uncertain of her role, afraid of overstepping, conscious that the staff had worked at the ranch for years before she arrived. But she approached her new position the same way she'd approached everything, with humility, attention to detail, and respect for others. She learned everyone's names and responsibilities. She consulted with the cook rather than dictating menus. She asked questions instead of assuming she knew best. Slowly, the staff relaxed around her. They began offering suggestions, smiling more freely, treating her not as an interloper but as their new mistress. Ethan was patient with Martha's adjustment. He didn't expect her to transform overnight into someone comfortable giving orders or managing a large household. Instead, he supported her, encouraged her, and reminded her constantly that she belonged here. "You're not an imposter," he told her one night as they prepared for bed. "This is your home now, our home." "I know," Martha said, though some days she still felt like she was playing pretend. "It's just so different from anything I've known." "Different isn't bad. You're bringing your own perspective, your own strengths. The staff already loves you, did you know that? Cook told Father you actually listen when she talks about supplies and equipment needs." The previous lady of the house never bothered. Martha flushed with pleasure. "I just treated her how I'd want to be treated." "Exactly. That's who you are. Don't change that because you think you're supposed to act differently now." Their marriage deepened as fall turned to winter. They learned each other's rhythms, preferences, quirks. Ethan discovered Martha loved reading by the fire, that she hummed while working, that she woke slowly and needed coffee before conversation. Martha learned Ethan was grumpy when tired, generous to a fault, and secretly insecure about living up to his father's legacy. They worked together on the ranch. Martha insisted on contributing, and Ethan taught her about cattle management, financial record keeping, and long-term planning. She had an excellent head for numbers and organization, catching errors in ledgers that had gone unnoticed for months. "You're a natural at this," Ethan said, watching her reorganize the ranch's entire filing system. "Have you always been good with accounting?" "I kept books for Mrs. Carlyle," Martha said. "And before that I helped my father at the land office. Numbers make sense to me, they're logical." "You're making the ranch more efficient," Father noticed. He was impressed. Martha glowed at the praise. Earning Thomas Irving's respect felt like a genuine accomplishment. Winter brought challenges. A harsh storm killed several cattle and damaged outbuildings. Money was tight. Ethan worked himself to exhaustion repairing fences and caring for surviving livestock. Martha watched him struggle with the weight of responsibility, his confidence shaken. One night he came in after dark, frozen and discouraged. "We lost another dozen head today. I don't know what I'm doing wrong." Martha helped him out of his wet coat, sat him by the fire and brought hot coffee. "You're not doing anything wrong. This is a terrible storm, worse than anyone predicted. You're doing everything possible. Father would have done better. He'd have anticipated this, prepared more." "Your father has 30 more years of experience," Martha said firmly. "You're 24, Ethan, you're learning. And you're doing well. The hands respect you. They work hard because you work hard. That's leadership." He looked at her, exhausted eyes searching. "How are you so certain?" "Because I know you. I know your heart. You care about this ranch, these animals, these people. That matters more than never making mistakes." Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding tight. "I don't know what I did to deserve you." "You saw me when I was invisible," Martha whispered. "You loved me when I couldn't love myself. That's what you did." The storm eventually passed. Spring brought new life to the ranch. Calves were born, grass grew green, and financial troubles eased. Ethan's confidence returned, but tempered now, more realistic. He consulted Martha on major decisions, valued her input, and openly credited her when her suggestions proved wise. One afternoon in May, Martha realized her monthly courses were late. Her breasts felt tender and certain smells made her nauseated. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope. But when another week passed with no bleeding, she allowed herself to consider the possibility. She was pregnant. The knowledge filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She wanted children desperately but feared everything that could go wrong. Her own mother had lost 2 babies before Martha was born. Childbirth was dangerous. Women died. But when she finally told Ethan, his reaction banished her fears. He whooped with delight, lifting her carefully and spinning her once before setting her down like she was made of glass. "A baby," he breathed, hands hovering near her still flat stomach. "We're having a baby." "Martha, you've made me the happiest man alive." "You're not worried?" she asked. "Of course I'm worried. I'm terrified, but I'm mostly just overjoyed." He kissed her tenderly. "You're going to be an amazing mother, and you'll be an amazing father." They shared the news with Thomas that evening. The older man's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "A grandchild. Well then, this calls for celebration." Over dinner, Thomas shared stories of Ethan's childhood, making them all laugh. But later, he pulled Martha aside. "My wife died when Ethan was 12, he said quietly. "Childbirth is hard, especially out here far from doctors. Promise me you'll be careful. Get the best midwife. Don't take risks." "I promise," Martha said, touched by his concern. "This family hasn't had enough joy in recent years," Thomas continued. "You and that baby, you're bringing life back to this house. Thank you for that." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Martha felt well, just tired and occasionally queasy. She continued working, though Ethan fussed constantly, trying to prevent her from lifting anything or standing too long. "I'm pregnant, not made of porcelain," Martha told him after he tried to carry her up the stairs. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my wife having my baby," Ethan countered. "That's different. You're impossible. You love me anyway." She did. More every day, if that was possible. Summer brought intense heat. Martha grew larger, her belly swelling obviously now. The baby kicked constantly, especially at night. Ethan would place his hand on her stomach, feeling the movement, his face filled with wonder. "Hello in there," he'd whisper. "I'm your papa. I can't wait to meet you." Martha treasured these moments, her husband's joy so pure it made her heart ache. Sometimes she still couldn't believe this was her life. that she'd gone from scrubbing floors to being loved by a man like Ethan, to carrying his child, to being mistress of this beautiful ranch. In September, with the baby due any day, Martha's water broke during dinner. Ethan went white, then sprang into action. The midwife was summoned, Martha was settled in their bedroom, and a long night began. Labor was harder than Martha had imagined. Hours of pain, exhaustion, fear. But Ethan stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, encouraging her when she wanted to give up. "You can do this," he said over and over. "You're the strongest person I know. You can do this." Just after dawn, their son was born, tiny, red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and powerful lungs. The midwife cleaned him and placed him in Martha's arms, and Martha fell instantly, completely in love. "He's perfect," she breathed, tears streaming down her face. Ethan leaned over them both, his own eyes wet. "He is absolutely perfect." He kissed Martha's forehead, then carefully touched his son's tiny hand. Small fingers wrapped around his thumb reflexively. "What should we name him?" They discussed names for months but never quite decided. Now, looking at her son, Martha knew. "Samuel," she said, "after my father." "Samuel Irving," Ethan repeated. "I like that." "Hello, Samuel. Welcome to the world, little man." The next weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, constant feedings, and overwhelming love. Samuel was a demanding baby, but healthy and growing. Martha had never known exhaustion like this, but she'd never known such fulfillment either. Ethan was a devoted father. He changed diapers without complaint, walked with Samuel when the baby was fussy, and sang off key lullabies that somehow always worked. Martha would watch him with their son and fall in love all over again. "You're a natural at this," she told him one night, watching him rock Samuel to sleep. "I had a good teacher," Ethan said, smiling at her. "You make everything look easy. It's not easy. I'm terrified most of the time." "So am I. But we're doing it together. That makes all the difference." As Samuel grew from newborn to infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Ethan and Martha worked as partners, each bringing strengths that complemented the other. Ethan's boldness and confidence drove expansion and innovation. Martha's careful planning and attention to detail prevented costly mistakes. Together, they balanced perfectly. The town of Wallace had fully accepted their marriage by now. Martha was active in the church, helped organize community events, and earned respect in her own right. She never forgot her humble beginnings, never looked down on those who served or struggled. That humility made her beloved among the working families. When Samuel was 2, Martha discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. In the spring of 1881, she gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline, a beautiful baby with Ethan's silver-gray eyes and Martha's dark hair. "Now we're really a family," Ethan said, holding Caroline while Samuel toddled around their feet. "Two perfect children and the most perfect wife." "Nothing's perfect," Martha corrected, but she was smiling. "But we're pretty close." Thomas Irving was a doting grandfather, gentler with the children than he'd ever been with adult humans. He carved wooden toys for Samuel and rocked Caroline for hours. The grief he'd carried since his wife's death seemed to ease, replaced by joy in this new generation. Years passed in a rhythm of seasons, children growing, the ranch thriving. Samuel proved to be thoughtful and sensitive, more interested in books than horses. Caroline was bold and adventurous, always climbing things and pushing boundaries. They were perfect opposites, just like their parents. Ethan's pride had transformed over the years. He no longer needed to be the loudest voice in every room or win every competition. His confidence came from different sources now. A successful ranch, a loving marriage, healthy children, respect earned through fairness rather than demanded through bravado. "You've changed me," he told Martha one evening as they sat on the porch watching sunset. The children played in the yard, Samuel building something with blocks while Caroline attempted to ride the dog. "The man I was before you, I don't even recognize him." "You were always a good man," Martha said. "You just needed someone to see beneath the showmanship. And you needed someone to see that you weren't invisible at all. You were just hidden, waiting for the right person to look." Martha leaned against him, content. "We found each other at exactly the right time. Do you ever regret it, marrying me, leaving your old life?" "Never." Martha's voice was certain. "Not for 1 second. Do you?" "My only regret is that I didn't find you sooner." Ethan kissed the top of her head. "Though maybe we both needed to become who we were before we could recognize each other." In 1885, when Samuel was 6 and Caroline 4, Martha convinced Ethan to fund a school in Wallace. Many children of ranch workers and town laborers had no access to education. Martha remembered her own father teaching her to read, how that gift had opened worlds. She wanted that for every child. The school started small, just 1 room and 1 teacher, but it grew. Martha served on the school board, helped select books, and advocated for including children regardless of their family's ability to pay. Education, she believed, could break cycles of poverty and limitation. "You're changing this town," Ethan observed, watching her prepare for a school board meeting. "Making it better." "We're changing it," Martha corrected. "This was only possible because you supported it. I'm just providing money, you're providing vision." "That's partnership," Martha said. "Each contributing what we can." By the late 1880s, the Irving Ranch was one of the most successful operations in Wyoming. But more than that, it was known for fair treatment of workers, ethical practices, and community involvement. Other ranchers came to Ethan and Martha for advice. Their marriage was held up as an example of what could happen when 2 people truly complemented each other. Martha's influence on Ethan was obvious to everyone. He listened more and talked less. He considered other perspectives before making decisions. He shared credit generously and admitted mistakes openly. The cowboy who'd once stood on a saloon table bragging about his superiority now worked quietly alongside ranch hands, his competence speaking louder than any words. And Ethan's influence on Martha was equally transformative. She carried herself with confidence now, no longer shrinking or apologizing for taking up space. She spoke her mind in meetings, offered opinions without prefacing them with doubt, and embraced her role as a community leader. The woman who'd once considered herself invisible now understood her own worth. In 1890, their 3rd child was born, another boy they named Thomas after his grandfather. The elder Thomas cried when they told him, overcome with emotion. The old man's health was declining, and knowing his name would continue brought him peace. Samuel was 9 now, serious and bookish. He wanted to be a teacher, following in the footsteps of the school Martha had helped establish. Caroline at 7 was fearless, already an accomplished rider who helped Ethan with horses. Baby Thomas was placid and easy, smiling at everyone. Raising 3 children while managing ranch responsibilities kept Martha busy, but she thrived on the challenge. She'd learned to delegate, to ask for help when needed, to accept that perfection wasn't required. She was gentler with herself now, less driven by fear of inadequacy. One evening, after getting all 3 children to bed, Martha and Ethan sat in their bedroom, exhausted but happy. "Do you remember the day we met?" Martha asked. "At the festival when I knocked over those cups. I remember thinking you were the most interesting woman I'd ever seen," Ethan said. "You ran away from me. Nobody ever ran away from me before. I was terrified." You were so confident, so celebrated, and I was nobody. You were never nobody." Ethan pulled her close. "You were exactly who I needed, I just didn't know it yet. You balanced me, Martha, you still do." "And you balanced me," Martha said softly. "Showed me I could be more than I believed possible." They sat in comfortable silence, the sounds of the ranch settling for night around them. Horses nickered in the barn. Wind rustled through trees. An owl hooted in the distance. These were the sounds of home, of the life they'd built together. Thomas Irving passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1891. He'd lived to see his grandchildren growing strong and healthy, his ranch prospering under his son's leadership, and his family name carried on with honor. The funeral was well attended, testament to a life well lived. After his father's death, Ethan took full ownership of the ranch. It was bittersweet, the responsibility he'd always known would come but never quite felt ready for. But Martha was beside him, and together they navigated the transition. "Your father was proud of you," Martha told him as they went through Thomas's papers. "He told me so many times. He said you'd surpassed anything he'd accomplished because you'd learned to balance strength with wisdom." "He said that?" "Yes. The day before he died, actually. He said you'd grown into the man he'd always hoped you'd become, and that it was largely because you'd married the right woman." Martha smiled through tears. "He called me the best thing that ever happened to this family." Ethan held her as they both cried, mourning but also celebrating a life well lived and a legacy honored. The 1890s brought change to Wyoming. Statehood arrived, bringing new opportunities and challenges. The open-range era was ending, fenced pastures replacing endless grassland. The railroad expanded, connecting remote towns to larger markets. The Wild West was becoming less wild, more settled and civilized. Through it all, the Irving Ranch adapted and thrived. Ethan and Martha modernized operations while maintaining their commitment to ethical practices and community involvement. They added new buildings, improved breeding stock, and diversified income sources. The ranch employed over 50 people during peak seasons, and the Irvings were known as fair, generous employers. Samuel, showing no interest in ranching, was sent to school in Cheyenne when he turned 14. It was hard letting him go, but Martha and Ethan supported his dreams. Caroline, at 12, was already working horses with skill that impressed seasoned ranch hands. She announced she wanted to be the first woman to win the Wyoming Rodeo Championships, a goal that made Ethan burst with pride. Little Thomas, now 4, followed his sister everywhere, determined to do everything she did. In 1895, Martha's 42nd birthday brought reflection. She stood at her bedroom window one morning, watching the sun rise over land that had become home. 20 years had passed since that day at the festival when she'd knocked over tin cups and caught the attention of the proudest cowboy in Wyoming. So much had changed. That frightened, humble girl who thought herself invisible had become a confident woman, respected throughout the territory. She'd raised 3 remarkable children. She'd helped build a successful ranch and strong community. She'd loved and been loved beyond anything she'd imagined possible. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. Nothing. How lucky I am." "We're lucky," Ethan corrected. "Both of us. We found each other, built something real together." "Do you ever miss it?" Martha asked. "The way people used to treat you like you were special, the attention and admiration," Ethan laughed. "God, no, that was empty, Martha, all show and no substance. This." He gestured to the ranch, the family photos on the wall, the evidence of their life together. "This is real, this matters. I'd choose this over any amount of empty praise." Martha turned in his arms to face him. At 42, Ethan had silver threading through his hair, lines around his eyes, the weathering of years working outdoors. But he was more handsome to her now than he'd been at 24. His beauty came from within now, from character and kindness rather than just physical appearance. "I love you," she said simply. "More every year. I love you too, more than I have words to express." He kissed her tenderly. "You took a proud, arrogant cowboy and taught him what really mattered. You saved me from myself. And you took an invisible woman and showed her she deserved to be seen." We saved each other. Years continued to pass. Samuel became a teacher in Cheyenne, married a kind schoolteacher named Elizabeth, and started his own family. Caroline shocked everyone by not just competing in but winning the Wyoming Women's Rodeo Championship at 19, exactly as she'd predicted. She married a ranch hand named Daniel, who appreciated her strength and independence. Thomas grew into a gentle young man who loved the land, working beside his father and learning everything about ranch management. By 1900, Ethan and Martha were grandparents 3 times over, with more grandchildren likely coming. The new century brought excitement and uncertainty. Automobiles were appearing, though still rare. Electricity was coming to some towns. The world was changing faster than anyone had predicted. But some things remained constant. Every evening, weather permitting, Ethan and Martha sat on their porch watching the sunset. They held hands, talked about their day, and simply enjoyed each other's presence. It was a ritual they'd maintained for over 20 years, and neither could imagine abandoning it. "We're getting old," Martha observed one evening, noticing new stiffness in her joints. "We're getting experienced," Ethan corrected with a smile. "And I plan to keep getting more experienced with you for many years yet. You're still impossibly optimistic. And you're still beautifully grounded. See, still balanced." Martha laughed, the sound carrying across their land. She'd laughed more in 22 years of marriage than in all the years before. Ethan had taught her joy, spontaneity, hope, and she taught him humility, patience, and the value of quiet moments. In 1905, they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a large party. The whole town of Wallace came, along with family from across Wyoming. People gave speeches praising the couple who defied expectations and built something beautiful together. "They were the most unlikely match," Mrs. Carlyle said in her toast. She was elderly now but still sharp. "He was all pride and swagger. She was all modesty and service. But somehow they fit. They balanced each other perfectly, and in doing so they made each other better." After the party, alone in their bedroom, Martha and Ethan held each other close. 25 years, Martha marveled. "It feels like yesterday and forever ago simultaneously." "I remember every detail of our wedding day," Ethan said. "How beautiful you looked, how certain I felt, how right it all was. No regrets. Not a single one. Only that we didn't have more years together before we met. But maybe those years were necessary. Maybe we had to become who we were separately before we could become who we are together." "Wise as always," Ethan said, kissing her temple. "My Martha, the woman who taught a proud cowboy that real strength is quiet, real confidence needs no audience, and real love balances rather than dominates." "And my Ethan," Martha replied, "the man who taught a humble woman that she deserves to be seen, her voice deserves to be heard, and love can elevate without diminishing." They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had for 25 years, as they would for however many years remained. Outside, the ranch settled into night. Their grandchildren slept in various bedrooms throughout the house, visiting for the celebration. Their children were successful and happy in their own lives, carrying forward the lessons learned from parents who'd shown them what real partnership looked like. The years that followed brought the challenges of aging. Ethan's joints grew stiff from decades of ranch work. Martha's eyesight weakened, making detailed work harder, but they adapted, supporting each other through each change. Their love didn't diminish with age. It deepened, becoming richer and more essential. By 1910, they'd stepped back from daily ranch management, turning operations over to Thomas, who'd proven himself more than capable. Ethan and Martha became advisors rather than managers, offering guidance when asked but trusting the next generation. They spent their days in simpler pursuits now. Ethan taught his grandchildren to ride, passing on skills and knowledge. Martha wrote letters to far-flung family members, maintained her involvement in the Wallace School Board, and worked on a memoir she'd been writing for years. The memoir focused on their courtship and early marriage, a love story she wanted preserved for future generations. She wrote honestly about her initial doubts, society's skepticism, and the challenges they'd faced. But mostly she wrote about how love had transformed them both. "Read me what you wrote today," Ethan would request in the evenings. Martha would read passages aloud, and they'd discuss memories, laughing at some, getting emotional over others. The process brought them even closer, helping them appreciate the journey they'd traveled together. In the summer of 1912, Wallace organized a celebration honoring longtime residents who'd shaped the community. Ethan and Martha were among those honored, praised for their contributions to education, their ethical business practices, and the example they'd set as a married couple. At the ceremony, the mayor gave a speech that made both Ethan and Martha tear up. 34 years ago, these two people shocked this town by falling in love across social boundaries. Many doubted their marriage would last, but they proved everyone wrong. They showed us that love doesn't require two identical people. Sometimes the best partnerships are between opposites who balance each other. The proud cowboy needed the humble woman's perspective. The humble woman needed the proud cowboy's confidence. Together, they became something greater than either could have been alone. They've enriched this community immeasurably, and we're honored to celebrate them today. After the ceremony, surrounded by well-wishers, Ethan leaned close to Martha's ear. "Still think you were invisible and insignificant?" "No," Martha admitted with a smile. "You cured me of that decades ago. And you cured me of thinking I was so special I didn't need anyone. We healed each other." They stood together, hands clasped, looking at the town they'd helped build, the community they'd served, the legacy they'd created. It wasn't just the ranch or the school or the businesses they'd supported. It was the example they'd set, the proof that love could transcend boundaries, that opposites could thrive together, that pride and humility could balance into something beautiful. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them, a family built on love, respect, and partnership. Samuel with his teaching career, shaping young minds. Caroline with her rodeo achievements, breaking barriers for women. Thomas running the ranch with fairness and skill learned from his parents. Grandchildren already showing signs of their own unique paths. This was their legacy. Not land or money or possessions, but people. Lives touched, perspectives changed, a better world created one decision at a time. That evening on their beloved porch, Martha rested her head on Ethan's shoulder. They were both in their 60s now, gray-haired and weathered but still inseparable. "I've been thinking," Martha said, "about writing the end of my memoir. It's not finished, not quite. I wanted to get to this point to where we can look back on a full life and see what we built." "What will you write?" Martha thought for a moment. "I'll write about how love doesn't require two perfect people. It requires two willing people, willing to grow, to change, to balance each other. I'll write about how the proudest cowboy in Wyoming and the humblest woman in Wallace found each other, and in finding each other, found themselves." "That's beautiful," Ethan said softly. And absolutely true. I'll write about how our differences made us stronger, not weaker. How your confidence helped me find my voice, and my humility helped you find your heart. How we weren't meant to be the same, we were meant to complement each other. You should write that love stories don't always look like people expect, Ethan added. That sometimes the best love stories are between people nobody thinks will work. Yes, Martha smiled. I'll write that too. They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged, the same stars they'd watched together for over 3 decades. The ranch was quiet around them, peaceful and prosperous. Everything they'd worked for, everything they'd built, everything they'd dreamed had come to fruition. Martha, Ethan said eventually, thank you. For what? For taking a chance on me all those years ago, for seeing past my pride to the man underneath. For loving me even when I didn't deserve it, for building this life with me, for everything. Martha turned to kiss him gently. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing I was worth more than I believed myself, for choosing me when you could have had anyone. For every day of the past 34 years. Here's to the next 34, Ethan said with a grin. Let's start with the next year and work from there, Martha replied practically, making him laugh. Ever the realist, that's my Martha. And ever the optimist, that's my Ethan. Still balanced, they said together, then laughed at the jinx. The night deepened around them, but neither moved to go inside. These moments were too precious, too perfect. The day had been full of celebration and recognition, but this quiet evening together meant more than any public honor. They'd started as opposites. The man who needed the whole world to know his worth, and the woman who asked for nothing. The cowboy who stood on tables bragging about his accomplishments, and the housekeeper who scrubbed floors without complaint. The proud and the humble. But somehow, impossibly, they'd fit together. His confidence had elevated her, showing her she deserved recognition and respect. Her humility had grounded him, teaching him that true strength didn't need an audience. They'd each brought something the other needed, and in the blending, they'd both become more than they'd been alone. 34 years of marriage, 3 children, 7 grandchildren so far, with more likely coming. A successful ranch that provided employment and stability for dozens of families. A school that educated hundreds of children. A community enriched by their presence and service. A love story that had inspired others to look beyond surface differences and see the potential in unlikely pairings. This was the legacy of the proudest cowboy in Wyoming and the humblest woman in Wallace. Not perfection, but persistence. Not a fairy tale, but a real story of 2 flawed people choosing each other every day, growing together, balancing each other, building something beautiful from their differences. And as they finally stood to go inside, hand in hand as always, they carried with them the knowledge that they'd done it right. They'd loved well. They'd built something lasting. They'd proved that opposites don't just attract, they can thrive, creating harmony from difference, strength from balance, and enduring love from an unlikely beginning. Their story was complete, full, and exactly as it should be. The proud cowboy had learned humility through love. The humble woman had learned confidence through acceptance. And together, they'd created a life, a family, and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of love to transform, balance, and perfect those willing to embrace it.